Hi, this is Stephen Carson from St. Louis, Missouri in these United States, back with my show here, Radical Liberation, and I'm just feeling better and better about this show. I don't know if you can tell, have some part of my final approach here on the studio is there's more pieces in place. The lights are in place, and I've just got a technical problem where I can't use OBS. Anyway, it's going to be super slick in about a week or two. All the pieces will have come together of the jigsaw puzzle. So thanks for everyone supporting the show and helping me to increase the production values. Okay, so this is an Econ Minis. That means we're going to talk more about like current events. We're going to talk about, we're going to continue my sort of, my own weird way of covering the war in the Ukraine. But this will be a little more direct with what's going on than I have been, but on the economic side. And we've got Black Horse with us. Hello, Black Horse.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Very good. Excited to cover this. I didn't use it in the marketing, but just to give a teaser before we get there, I had suggested that we are maybe the U.S. shouldn't have taken on a people who are good at playing chess, and you'll see what I mean by that comment later on. But as usual, what we're going to do is we're going to cover a few small topics, and then we'll get to our big current events topic, which is what in the world happened with the ruble, because I think a lot of people are taken by surprise. In fact, Black Horse, I don't know if you saw it, but AA's nemesis Millerman was asking, what's going on with the ruble? What do you make of that? You know, but he wasn't the only one. Oliver Semiagog had posted something as well, and either I or someone else is saying Radlib's about to cover it. You know, so the time is coming very shortly. We're going to do something real brief and then get into that main topic, which is really interesting. I think, kind of dramatic. Okay, so let's get right to it. A markets review. He makes it sound so official. Okay, so right.
So
let me make sure I'm not misunderstanding what we're doing here. What we're going to help people understand, I think, by focusing on this first slide, Black Horse, light sweet crude oil, is that about the gas prices, which everybody is noticing at the pump. Is that correct?
So we're gonna look at the energy markets a little bit, because it's a big focus both of people's sort of regular life, but also of it's important background to for the discussion we're having later about the geopolitical situation. So what we're looking at here, educational moment to begin with. Every commodity price that you ever see posted has a couple of elements to it. It has a specific commodity that's delivered, it has a quantity, and very importantly, it has a place. So commodity prices aren't just the commodity in some random location, they're the commodity in a specific location. And
right,
in an
because prices are not the same for a commodity across the globe. And you could have a very different price in the middle of China versus New York or something like that, right?
That's right. So a classic example of this is landlocked oil in Alberta in central Canada always trades at a significant discount to oil at a port or oil near a Texas refinery because of the lack of pipeline capacity to deliver it out of the middle of the continent.
Got it. Right.
And so when you're looking at a geopolitical situation like the sanctions on Russia or like the effects of a major war, one of the first things you want to look for in the commodity markets is disruptions to delivery at specific locations, as referenced by the changes in price depending on where you want the commodity delivered.
And what's the significance, having Ryan Turnipseed in mind, what's the significance of one of these being in Cushing, Oklahoma?
So Cushing, Oklahoma is the largest oil storage facility in the world. And it is the storage facility primarily used by the refiners in the United States. So if you're looking at an oil future for the continental United States, it is almost always measuring what that type of oil West Texas Intermediate is kind of when people say the price of oil, they're usually talking about West Texas Intermediate delivered in Cushing, or they're talking about West Texas Intermediate delivered in Brent, which is in the North Sea. So these are
so in both cases, they're going to be distributed from these sort of central points.
Well, they're distributed from, right? Yeah. So these are big oil storage facilities.
Right. I mean, this is the main way station in between them actually getting the oil out of the ground. They keep it at Cushing or Brent, and then it makes its way actually to us.
That's right. So it goes from there to the refinery, and then the refined product goes to wherever it's going.
Right.
So the spread between Cushing and Brent is a spread that measures the capacity, the sort of freight capacity to deliver oil across large bodies of water. Because anytime that there's a difference in price at the refineries in Texas versus at the refineries in like the North Sea or at the refineries in the Middle East, you're going to see spreads emerge between the prices, and those spreads will either be quickly closed because there's lots of shipping capacity, or they're not going to be quickly closed because there's something disrupting international freight.
Got it.
And so there's been a couple of, when we look at the market story as it's played out over the last, I don't know, month and a half, there's been a lot of talk about rises in the price of oil. But if we look at our chart on the left, which is a chart of the price of oil in North America, you'll see that there's a long trend line here going back way before Ukraine was an issue of rising oil prices that has to do with a long running story of demand outstripping production gains.
Right, and we kind of hinted at this on the show about the wartime. Welcome to the wartime economy. We were pointing out that you can't blame everything on Putin, right? Because before February 24th or whatever it was, we already had certain trends in place, and this is one of them.
And if you look at where the price of oil is right now at 101.94 in the chart, I think this snap I took yesterday, that's really in line with the long-term trend you see going back to December 2021.
Sort of the temporary shocks have already, well, we'll see what happens next, but you can sort of ignore the temporary shocks, draw a line, and you kind of end up where we are right this moment.
Yeah, so in terms of the effect of the Ukraine conflict on oil prices, if there has been one, it has been transient and not large to this point.
Very interesting. So when we see well, I shouldn't say numbers because it really depends on whether you're in California, say, as we'll see. But when you see your gas price like double, say, from what it was in not that long ago, you can't. What you're showing us here is you can't really blame the war at this point. That's we're kind of over that.
Yeah, I think it would be. I mean, if you went gas shopping on the 1st of March, maybe you could have, but
right, exactly, right. I mean today, but I don't mean any time in this last month, but like right now or in the next couple of weeks, assuming this trend holds, it seems like the war shock is already out of it, and we're back to this sort of long-term trend up.
Equally, if you look at the Brent WTI spread, there was a very extreme shock, but we're back in line with historic norms where.
Okay, now I'm sorry, you're going to have to teach us. Now the left side is literally a price, right? So we're watching the price go up and down. But this spread, you're going to have to teach us what this means. Like, what's good? What's good on this?
That's the difference between the price of light sweet crude oil in Cushing, Oklahoma, and light sweet crude oil in the North Sea.
Right. So for people who get their gas through the North Sea, you want to see this line higher or lower? Which one's good?
Higher, it means that you have oil cheaper in Europe. Lower means you have oil cheaper in North America.
Oh.
Okay. So you'll see that, as you would expect, during the Ukrainian crisis, you have a situation where oil gets more expensive more quickly in Europe than it does in North America, and that's what that spike downward in the WTI Brent spread is all about.
Okay, wait, I'm sorry. So the big spike downward, which is early March, where we see that dramatic, that's what happened right there?
So that means oil is more expensive in Europe than it is in North America in that period.
Okay.
Which reflects stress on the fuel supply system in Europe, but not in North America.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, yeah. America more or less kept on humming, though the chart on the left shows us that we weren't completely unaffected, right? Because it's a worldwide market.
Well, that's right. And one of the things we need to keep in mind when we're talking about sanctions is it's a worldwide market on an interchangeable commodity. So in order to cut off a source from the global markets and drive price changes, you need to affect not only you need to not only sanction the country, but you also need to blockade the country in order to affect in order to affect a fundamental change in the international market, especially if it's a non-perishable commodity like light sweet crude.
Right, because basically something like that, it can just get sort of shipped around the long way or whatever, and they still get it, even though you're saying you're not buying this from us. Well, if it gets sold to Brazil and then to China and then to Russia, well, they got it in the end. It just at a little higher price, right?
That's right, and that's why you see this big strain on the WTI Brent spread. That's reflecting more shipping going on and therefore higher cost to ship.
Got it. Right, right. Okay. Anything else we want to draw from this? Oh, well, sorry, just having looked at the details a little bit, I just want to re-emphasize the point that you brought up on the chart on the left, which is that, the trend, we start to see that line go up on the WTI price, the gas price, and it's late 2021. So it's literally months before the invasion of Iraq. We've got a pretty solid trend. You can imagine drawing a line right there, right? Pretty solid trend. And as you point out, if you take out the shocks, the two bumps there, and continue that trend, you pretty much end up where we are. Oops, sorry, my mouse did something I didn't want to do. Okay, there we go. You pretty much end up where we are right now.
Yeah, we're looking at a long-running market trend to which the event in Russia at present looks like a sideshow.
Right. Yeah, and so tell us again. So now that you've made a pretty persuasive argument that the war is not the reason for the prices at the pump, what is, in your view?
Well, so we're looking at the commodity. We'll look at prices at the pump in a little bit, but the prices at the commodity price issue is a long-running supply and demand story. So we're all aware that U.S. domestic production of oil has declined in the post-2020 election era. That decline in production is going to drive an increase in price. This is classical economics.
Okay, so this is literally the energy policies of the Biden administration, is what you're saying.
The Biden administration, but also, other places as well.
What do you mean?
Well, the United States is not the only country that is restricting the expansion of supply of oil, right?
Right,
so
right. Okay, yeah.
All throughout Europe, there are countries that could drill for oil that are not drilling for oil. That restriction in supply is part of what's driving this.
Okay, so in other words, if you had to put a label on that trend, draw an arrow and put a label that sort of ignores the war shocks and just shows that trend, and you wanted to label that arrow, you could label it "Build Back Better," the green economy, right?
Yeah,
something like that.
You could choose your favorite version of that. Yes.
Right, exactly. Okay. Ready for the next slide, sir?
Okay, so the next slide here, we're going to look at
natural gas.
Yeah. So natural gas is a bit of a different story. So we're looking at natural gas is a commodity that is actually quite difficult and expensive to ship. It's also a commodity that people have a lot of trouble interposing markets for, because the conventions for it are quite different in North America versus in Europe, partly because of the different primary uses. So when you see natural gas prices quoted in North America, you'll always see them quoted based on a particular number of BTUs, thermal units, burning it for heat. Whereas if you see them quoted in Europe, it's always based on a number of kilowatt hours burned for electricity. So makes charting the comparison a little bit more challenging, but we'll work through it.
Yeah, just on a personal note, when you say using it for, for electricity. No, wait, I'm sorry. No, I take it back. I use propane at my main house, but that would be the BTU measure, I guess, because we are not
That's
turning
right.
into electricity. We just directly use it for the hot water heater, etc.
So in North America, like hundreds of millions of people burn natural gas to heat their houses, for hot water heaters, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And up until really the last 10 years, that was the completely dominant use case for the commodity. Whereas in Europe, there has been a shorter history of using natural gas to heat homes and a longer history of using it to generate power.
Got it. Okay. Right. Okay. So continue with the charts then.
So on the left-hand side, we're looking at Henry Hub natural gas. Henry Hub is another one of these storage facilities. This one is in Louisiana. I don't really know why it's in a different place than the oil storage facility, but there it is. If you go and watch a business news show, when they talk about the price of natural gas, almost always they'll be talking about natural gas distributed at the hub in Louisiana. And you'll see there's a story there again that goes back to January of 2022 of increasing prices.
Right. Now, the problem with focusing in with these charts, right, is that you have trouble putting it in a longer context. Do you happen to know if you had included all of 2021, would you see something more like a steady line?
So if you would see, so we actually covered this on an Econ mini we did maybe 6 months ago, where in the period between sort of 2014 and 2020, there was a superabundance of landlocked natural gas in North America, which led to periods of very, very low prices, on the order of $1 for natural gas. Since 2020, and the reduction of, so fracking in particular is a practice that accesses oil and gas resources that tend to have a lot of natural gas as a byproduct of fracking, when typically that drilling is primarily looking for oil. So it results in cost recovery selling of natural gas, which really drove the price down during the era where there was a lot of fracking being done in North America. Since that practice has stopped, you've seen a consistent rise in the price of natural gas. That natural gas tends to be pretty volatile, so there's lots of swings one way or the other, but it's been a consistent trend for quite a while.
Well, when you say $1, am I looking at the right?
Yeah. So
I see.
We're going back to December 2021, where the price is about $3. If you were to go back into like 2020, 2018, you'll see prices even quite a bit lower than that.
Yeah. Okay. So it was already it sounds like triple.
Yes.
Over 2020 to 2021.
So when we covered this 6 months ago, we were talking about doubles to get to the $3 level.
Yeah.
Now we're covering
now it's heading towards another doubling.
That's right.
Just in the couple months we've had in 2022.
And you'll see that the price in North America, there isn't even a dent really with the Ukrainian crisis. There's basically, I mean, if you were to read that chart and I laid on the dates of the Russia-Ukraine stuff, you wouldn't be able to detect a pattern. Right.
It's a different kind of market is what you're saying. And it's not so much affected by something like that, or certainly in within the US. right?
Yeah. Well, so what you're seeing there is the reality that international, like transoceanic shipping of natural gas is a subdominant force. The dominant force is is pipeline distributed natural gas that's extracted
Right.
close to its use.
Right, right, right. So we don't feel, unlike with crude, we don't feel those international effects very, very quickly
Yeah,
on something like natural
it's
gas.
more difficult.
Right, right. Okay, so then you've done a parallel here between this slide and the previous slide, I think, if I'm educated guess,
Yeah,
which is that first you show us the U.S. situation on the left, and then you show us the spread to Europe, right?
that's right. So ICIS Haran is natural gas delivered in the Netherlands. So as I say, the dollar figures here are a little bit difficult to understand because we're operating on two different standards. So the spread here is operating on the standard of 732 kilowatt hours of electricity. So it's hard to know what 732 kilowatt hours of electricity versus 1,000 BTUs of heat is. But
Right, right.
at a broad level, $5 natural gas equates to something like $70 ICIS Haran gas, maybe
Mm-hmm.
$80 ICIS Haran, and then you can work out the equivalence and draw a spread, and that's what's been done here.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see here that during the period dating back to September 2021, you have a pretty dramatic expansion of that spread, which means that natural gas was getting a lot more expensive in Europe when compared to sort of natural gas at international shipping. And certainly compared to natural gas delivered at Henry Hub in North America. And this is where, again, we covered this 6-8 months ago when we were covering natural gas shortages on the continent as a consequence of their extreme dependence on natural gas for electric generation.
Okay, so the blue line being high throughout the latter half of 2021, which is what you're showing on the chart here.
So that represents a situation where the price is comparable in Europe versus in North America.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry, I didn't see the axis. Right, that line is almost on the zero.
Yes.
So that's sort of they're very, very close.
And that would have been historic norm going back like many years.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting myself confused. Okay, I see. Going through 2020, 2021, up till about mid 2021, and now we start seeing the divergence kick in, right?
Yes. And so there's a bunch of different reasons for this story. We covered at some point Germany shutting down its nuclear generating capacity to rely more on where natural gas became their only means of generating baseline load capacity. There's been a lot of reasons for natural gas supply shortages in Europe. That said, there's a pretty extreme spike there during the Ukrainian event, right? From a $20 spread all the way to about a $55 spread.
Right, and just to be clear, there's sort of two are they stalagmites? I think no,
Yes.
stalactites. Sorry, stalactites hold tight to the ceiling. Yeah, there's two stalactites. One is at the end of 2021, and then the more dramatic one looks like it's lining up with the invasion of Ukraine. There,
that's correct.
Yeah,
and so what you're seeing there is a situation. I mean, a $50 spread. That's like a 50% difference in the price of natural gas in Europe versus in North America. That would be pretty extreme by any standard. And
okay, so this is not abstract for Europeans, just like the price at the pump is not abstract for any of us that drive cars. This is something they're going to see in their home heating bills, right?
Yeah, so home heating bills are often very socialized. So you have price controls and so on.
Might be smoothed out.
where you've seen this so far is you've seen factories forced to shut down in many
Right.
places in Europe due to
I remember
brownouts.
we were talking about that last year, and the
So
situation wasn't nearly so bad as it is now.
yeah, well, that was during the previous spike that you
Hmm.
see at kind of the. I mean, it looks pale now in the fall of 2021, right?
Right.
Um, Volkswagen has had terrible problems with this from from a supply chain point of view because their plants in different places keep shutting down.
Yeah,
Because
and I think for most of us who aren't involved with like the world of manufacturing, this must sound a little bit odd, but literally, as I understand it, what's happening here is somebody crunches the numbers and decides whether it's profitable at a given price of inputs, where energy is a major input for a lot of these factories, right? I'm sure they have other inputs they're factoring in, but energy is going to cut across all these manufacturing facilities. Somebody's doing the number crunching and saying, okay, once the price of our energy goes above a certain level, we literally just shut the factory down because we're losing our shirt by continuing to run the factory day to day.
that's
Right?
right, we shut it
Yeah.
down. We send all the people home. So that's
Yeah.
one version of this story. The other version of the story is that energy minister in local jurisdiction realizes that they don't have enough baseline capacity to keep everybody's lights on and has to decide who they're going to brown out today. And they decide that
Right.
Volkswagen is a better candidate than 100,000 local customers, for whatever
Almost.
calculus they're doing, right?
Right. Yeah. So it comes out whether through a market decision, a decentralized market decision, or more of a sort of a centralized fiat decision. You will keep running and you won't. You'll get energy today and you won't. One way or another, the energy shortage or high energy prices will manifest in somebody being out of luck on electricity. Right.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Wow. We used to call this a third world problem.
Well,
Remember?
welcome to the third world. It's come to you.
Yeah, because our graphic designer, I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, but who does the wonderful thumbnails? He's in Venezuela, which I think you may know they have some issues, and I have to be careful. Sometimes I cut it too close on what I would like for the thumbnail this week, and he says, "Hey, just little warning." Sometimes they just shut us down for like 12 hours and I have no electricity and I can't do any graphic design, So if you give me what you need for the show too close to the show, I might literally just be out of commission and you won't get your thumbnail. So I'm having to think about this, but I'm like, well, yeah, but that's Venezuela. But you're talking about Germany.
Yeah.
I mean, Germany, I think of as, like up there with the US, Canada, UK, not just first world, but like first of first world.
Yeah. I mean, they're a
So
G8
this is
country.
just say it again.
They're a G8 country, right?
G8. Yeah.
But that's
I'm sorry. There's a word for this. It's called G8, right? These are the top of the top of first world, right?
yeah. Although I think it's G7 now because they kicked Russia out. But
Oh, okay, G7, right. Anyway, it's just sort of just pausing for a moment to absorb that Germany is shutting down, what'd you say, Volkswagen factories because the prices of energy are so high. And they were doing this before Russia invaded Ukraine, right?
yes, they were doing this before. The other thing that's been a big target has been like metals refineries. So a very famous Dutch aluminum refining facility was another target for brownouts. Again,
Now,
same story, really high energy input kind of activity.
Similar to how we observed on the last slide, I note though that if you ignore the stalactites, the dramatic stalactites, particularly that last one from the beginning of the war, it seems to bounce back up and return to not a good place, but not quite as bad. I mean, it looks a little more like on trend or something.
Yeah, I mean, we'll discuss this a little bit more when we discuss the Russian currency, but it looks like natural gas deliveries from Russia are not going to be interrupted in the immediate future, which means that the spread here is going to settle at something related to the cost and capacity of shipping natural gas between the two ports. one of the things to be aware of when discussing a commodity like natural gas, shipping natural gas not by pipeline but by LNG port to port is expensive at the best of times and extremely expensive if you don't make large capital investments to create suitable ports. And one of the things that has been a target for the green movement has been denying permitting to the construction of the kind of infrastructure required to deliver natural gas internationally via seaport. So this has been a problem in Europe with receiving North American gas for a long time. Right now, a lot of the stuff you'll see in the media is really targeted at trying to get these kind of intermodal ports approved so that the Europeans will be better North American natural gas customers, basically. But I mean,
right. Okay. So green movement, you're talking about the green, in this case, you're talking about the green movement in Europe preventing development of ports.
That's right. So there's a Canadian story that I'm very familiar with. The Canadian a major Canadian energy company tried to build a port of this kind in BC in order to deliver LNG out over the Pacific to Asian customers. And there was like a 10-year battle in courts and with activists to try to get this built. It never got done. This is the kind of thing that's played out over and over again in jurisdictions where these forces have a lot of power.
Okay, we are almost halfway through the time we were planning to do the show in, so shall we move on?
We shall move on.
Okay, gasoline. Okay, so here's price at the pump, and just to, it's hard to see these axes, I know, for people.
No, so we're not at price at the pump yet. We're still at price of commodity. So RBOB gasoline, again, is refined product, but still at a storage facility. So again, we're looking at a very similar story here. If you look at the chart for RBOB gasoline futures, there's a long-running trend going back to December 2021. The price right now is more or less in line with that trend, even though there was a short-term shock during the Ukrainian crisis.
You see two shocks, and then we're back to where we, not back to where we were, but back
along the trend line
that we were on. Yeah.
And this chart really closely mirrors the chart on oil prices, so it's pretty clear we're dealing with an inputs problem rather than a refining capacity problem. So that's our chart on the right. Our chart on the left I included here because of a news story that went around in the sort of social media world. You might recall that in sort of mid-March there was a major announcement of a new oil and gas refinery to be built in China as part of a contract with a Saudi Arabian company. The premise being that Russian crude product would get delivered into China and refined and distributed on the international markets through means that are not related to countries participating in sanctions. So this spread here is the spread between gasoline prices in off the coast of Saudi Arabia versus gasoline prices in Singapore.
Now, by the way, you said on the left. I'm seeing it as on the right.
On the right, my mistake.
Yeah, got it. So Arab Gulf versus Singapore spread.
Yes. And you'll see this giant spike up.
That's the war.
Well, the giant spike down is the war, so that's the decline in. That means that gasoline in the Arab Gulf gets cheaper relative to gasoline in Singapore. That reflects a decline in the availability of tankers.
Okay.
And then a big spike up on speculation that this new refining facility is going to get built in East Asia. And then a big spike down when sobriety takes over.
Okay, yeah, right. Because this is futures, so it's people anticipating what the impact of these changes would be. And so there's some hope, I guess you could say, and then it dies.
Yeah, and then reality settles in that if the Chinese are going to build a refinery with Arab engineers and whatever, that capacity is not going to be available for quite a long time, because refineries are not 2-year projects. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so now we get to the pump. So
all right, gas prices by state.
So all of this said, the kinds of changes in prices we've talked about in oil and gasoline, these are like 40 and 50% changes in prices. Many of our viewers will be experiencing changes in prices much more significant than that. So I wanted to highlight here, I thought this chart is alphabetical. It comes from AAA's gas price list. It actually goes down to every gas station that they've got charted in North America. So if you want to know what all the different gas stations in California charge, they've got like apparently live data from all of them.
Amazing.
But anyways, it's good fortune that Arkansas and California are next to each other alphabetically in the list of states, because you can see the contrast here. So if you are an unfortunate Californian, you are spending almost $6 at the pump on, I think it was Wednesday that I pulled the snap. Whereas if you are a very fortunate Arkansas, you're spending $3.80.
Which is still way up.
Well, it's way up from where you were, but
yeah.
The point I wanted to raise here is that whatever the hell's going on in California, the increase in the price of the commodity is only a part of the story.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, right. Because what this wouldn't be is that, getting the gas from Oklahoma to the refinery to California is that much harder than going to Arkansas. That does not make sense.
No, there's a really strong correlation here between states that have high prices at the pump and states that have, strong blue governments that have found ways to make gas more expensive in their own states.
Right, and sometimes it's as simple as there's an at the pump tax.
Yeah.
So it's as simple as that. Sometimes it's more indirect, but in some cases they just slap a tax on the price of the pump.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend a 2-hour episode digging into why gas is so expensive in California, but it's worth highlighting to our viewers. This is not a story that is even primarily about an issue in the commodities market. This is a political story.
The California price, you mean?
Well, so if you're a regular American going to the pump and upset about it, you've got a long-term trend. You've got oil now sitting in line with a long-term trend, and you've got prices at the pump that vary almost 50% by state. So you're looking at a story that is not a straight commodity story.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad you said that. I just wanted to call out, if you sort of round up Arkansas and Colorado to say $4, round California just slightly to $6, you'd call it a 50% price difference. That is a lot. That's a lot. 50%. I mean, my goodness. And California, by the way, as you may have heard, is not like a little tiny like Delaware, where you're not going to use that much gas driving around in the state anyway. California's could be a country unto itself.
Yeah. So, well, how many people do they have out there? 30 million or something?
I don't know, but
I know their economy is larger than Canada. So
yes, there have been studies of, what if it was just the government, the Republic of California or whatever.
Yeah, the Republic of
economy would it be?
The Republic of California would be like a G5 nation or something.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so that's just insane. Okay, thanks. So, right, what's the takeaway then on the price of the pump? Two things. One is that there's a long-term trend that you cannot blame on the war. You need to look closer to home. Fair summary there, Black Horse?
Yeah, fair summary.
And then two, if you're in California, you've got something else to look to besides even that long-term trend, which is the policies in your own state and the tax policies in your own state. And you're saying California is a nice textbook example of this, but you could look, if you look through the list, you'll find some other outliers where they just have a price that is insanely more than the other states, right?
Yeah, you'll find a number of states up in the $5 range.
Wow.
For a variety of reasons.
Craziness. Okay. All right. Next slide.
Yeah, so next we want to look at wheat.
Okay, skipping over to wheat. Okay, yes. Yes, so I just wanted to, I plugged him before, but just wanted to mention again, Prudentialist, one of our friends in these circles who covers geopolitics, but he does more than that. And he's been really interested in the effect on certain countries that are a little more on the edge, say, than the US and Canada, I think, in terms of food. And what is going to be the impact in certain parts of Africa and Egypt and stuff like that of the things that Black Horse is about to talk about. So anyway, just wanted to give a shout out to the Prudentialist. Definitely check his channel out if you find this sort of thing interesting. Go ahead, but we're looking here at Chicago. Oh, I'm sorry, Chicago versus Black Sea.
That's right. So this is really a sanction story. So there, again, we could have done exactly the same thing as we did on gas, natural gas, and oil here, and shown spreads plus raw prices. Quicker summary here. I've just got the two commodities charted together going back to 2021. So the series in blue here is Chicago wheat, obviously wheat delivered in Chicago. The series in orange is wheat delivered at the Black Sea. So that's wheat actually delivered in Ukraine rather than delivered on the Russian side of the Black Sea.
Okay.
Okay, so that's outside of sanctions wheat. So a couple of things to note here. Most of the wheat delivered at the Black Sea comes from, well, okay, so again, here we see a pretty stable price up until the actual conflict in Ukraine. The price jump here really does seem to be a result of the conflict in Ukraine. You'll see a really big spike regionally, up to 70% on the price of wheat. And then you see a retracement as it looks like there are pretty effective redistribution mechanisms to get wheat to the region. And then you'll see Chicago wheat, there's sort of a long-term displacement of 15%. Here again, we should really talk about sanctions and commodities. So wheat is, one of those really interchangeable commodities. At this point, it's very clear that Russia will not be blockaded, which means that Russian wheat will be delivered to market somewhere or other, probably in India or China, which means that what you're looking at here is not wheat removed from the market except by additional spoilage, but you're looking at the costs of reorienting the global supply chain to a less efficient delivery mechanism.
So when you say that, you mean sort of more the end point of this chart.
That's right.
Because there's
there's
a temporary shock, and then it sort of settles down, but not to where it was before. And you're saying that explanation for why it isn't where it is before
is because the reorganized supply chain is less efficient than the supply chain undisturbed.
We're taking the long road around to get wheat to certain places and so forth.
That's right. And when you take the long road around with wheat, you're going to have more spoilage, you're going to have more loss in shipping, all the rest of it.
Got it.
So, that spread 15% versus 30% in the region, again, that's, going to be real unfortunate for certain people in the Central Asian region. But we're looking at, by historic standards, this is not like mass starvation, famine kind of inducing shocks to the price of wheat.
Right. Yeah. And that's why Prudentialist is not looking at, people starving in Kansas, right? He's looking at some places that were kind of on the edge anyway, even before all this. And now these kinds of things are enough to push them into trouble.
That's right. And so if you move the price of something 15%, all those people who are on the margins, more of them are going to fall off. And he would know better than I how many of those people actually fall off in a 15% increase in price.
Exactly. Right. Okay. I think that was the last slide on this one, right?
Yeah, that's the markets update.
Okay. Thank you. Excellent, Black Horse. All right. So let's move into the announced topic for the last 30 minutes or so, which is, well, let's start with a tweet from President Biden. This is from March 26th. So that is, let me get my calendar up. That was Saturday, just this last Saturday. So 5 days ago as we speak. He says, as a result of our unprecedented sanctions, the ruble was almost immediately reduced to rubble. The Russian economy is on track to be cut in half. It was ranked the 11th biggest economy in the world before this invasion, and soon it will not even rank among the top 20. Okay, so that was 5 days ago. And Black Horse wanted to feature this response to it from Jim Bianco. He says, nice timing. 4 days later, the ruble reversed all the war losses. All. President should get out of the market timing business and stick to what he's good at, making gaffes. Okay, so snide comments aside, that chart is a killer. Am I able to sort of blow it up? Yeah, there we go. So this is the story that we want to tell in the latter half of the show. The red line down is what everybody expected. Russia launches this invasion. Sanctions are put on Russia. Maybe a loss of confidence, right, in the Russian government, which can be manifested, can and is actually when there's a less confidence in the stability or the viability of a government, it'll be reflected in the currency associated with that government, right? In this case, the ruble. So that red line is kind of what everybody expected. It's the green line that everyone did not expect, which is that after the expected crash, which in this case, what we're saying is that rubles became less valuable relative to dollars, right? After that crash, then it not that quickly, but throughout much of March, it climbed right back up and is now back at where it was against the dollar, essentially.
Yeah,
right?
20 days in an FX market, that's very quickly.
Yeah, right. This is an amazing recovery for the ruble. Now, I forget, it might have been Academic Agent, somebody like that said, you don't necessarily want to see that green line keep going, right? Because then there's other problems possibly for Russia.
Well,
Russia would not want to see that line keep going and going.
Yeah, for an export-driven economy, what you want is a stable relationship between your currency and other currencies.
Right. Yeah. So the goal here then, and that'll be the theme we're looking at, is from Russia's point of view, they needed to stabilize the ruble. They needed to ideally stabilize it pretty quick, which it looks like they've done. Now we can't see into the future. What we have right now is that the ruble is back to more or less where it was against the dollar. If what we go through here, and sort of my guess, we'll see what Black Horse thinks. My guess is that they're pulling this off, and that would mean that this line would flatten out if we check back in a month or so, and it would just sort of stay more or less a little more steady with the U.S. dollar and not go down again, right?
That would be what success looks like.
Yeah, that would be success. That'd be the success condition. But certainly for the moment, it looks like they have really pulled themselves out in a remarkably fast way out of what a lot of people would have expected would be an inflation spiral as people lose confidence in the ruble, sell the ruble, get away from the ruble any which way they can.
Yeah, actually, what we could have done is look at the FX charts for other countries that have been the victim of U.S. sanctions. So if we had pulled the FX chart for Venezuela, or if we had pulled up the FX chart for like Iran or some of the other countries that have gone through this, typically what they look like is a downward parabola and then a long flat line at the bottom.
Right. It goes down and it stays down or even gets worse over
Yes,
time, right?
and it does that for a very long time.
Right. So yeah, I mean, this is a story. What's the beginning of that? I guess the beginning of that red line is the invasion, right? So we're talking very slightly over a month from the beginning of that red line to the end of that green line. So this is a very dramatic tale. Okay, so what happened? Okay, let's go to our first. We're going to go through several stories and then do a little bit of theory if we can fit it in. Okay, so first, as the thumbnail hinted at, we're going to look at, and there's a couple things going on that we're going to talk about, but two big ones we can talk about. Export market means that Russia exports stuff. In particular, they export more. It's fair to say, Black Horse, they are more in the business of exporting like raw materials as
So
opposed to
before we
services
go
and
through
manufactured goods, right?
before we go through these stories, let's talk very quickly about the dynamics that cause currencies to go up and down.
Okay.
So there's at least two dynamics at play. The first is an import-export supply and demand game, and the second is a confidence game. And on the first score, one of the things that drives FX rates is demand for currency driven by the need to buy products in a jurisdiction. So typically when the price of oil goes up, Canadian dollars go up because there's investment in the Canadian oil sands. So people need to buy Canadian dollars to invest in the Canadian oil sands, and that drives the price up. Same for every export economy. Russia is an export economy. Demand for rubles is driven by the need to buy rubles to pay for Russian exports. So that's one of the dynamics to look at. The other dynamic to look at is confidence. So when a country is hit with U.S. sanctions, one of the things that often happens is the locals there experience a quick drop in the value of their currency, and they immediately seek other currencies. So they exchange their Venezuelan, whatever they are, for US dollars or British pounds or something that they have some confidence will retain value over time. And that urge to exit local currency creates supply in local currency on the FX market that drives the price down. So those are really the two dynamics that they're trying to fight when they're dealing with sanctions. And these four stories will look at the strategies they've used to try to address that.
Right. Okay. So starting with part one, which is their exports, right?
Yeah. So the first thing,
story.
Really the first thing that they did to try to address this problem was to try to find alternative markets for their oil. So this is the story we touched on briefly, where I forget what the name of the Russian state oil company was.
Rosneft.
Yes, signed a deal to organize the construction of this giant refinery in China to try to create an alternative destination for Russian oil exports.
Give me a sec. I realized that I've gotten into a mode that is not what I want, and I can't get out of it. Great. Okay. Okay, sorry. I thought presentation mode was the thing to do, but that doesn't seem to be a good idea for PDFs. Here, maybe I can just redo it. There we go. Okay, because I couldn't scroll. I could only go a page at a time and miss the bottom half of the page. Okay, right. So, okay, yeah, and it's going to be mentioned somewhere here in these articles, but I think the thing to watch out for is that this was not the first time that Russia had some sanctions put on it, and they have not wasted the years in between. I think that's a theme we're going to see through here. So you might remember that there was a change in government, which I won't try to comment on right now, in 2014 in Ukraine. And one of the results of all that was that a more Russian-aligned leader was replaced with a more NATO, U.S. empire-aligned leaders. And Russia said, well, okay, but you can't have the Crimea. because the Crimea is where we have Sevastopol, which is a key naval base, I think. Anyway, so some sanctions were put in place at that time. I don't think they were, I don't know if you'd remember, Black Horse, but I gather they were not on the scale of what they're trying to do in terms of sanctions right now.
No, not even close, but
right. But it seems like the Russian lesson from this was, oh, we've got to figure out how to operate with serious sanctions put on us. And so they've been preparing all this time. So some of these stories are about things that just happened, but they're also mentioning things that have been going on for years, that Russia's been working on for years at this point.
And it's also fair to say that the U.S. has deployed, basically the same sanctions playbook on its enemies on and off for like 35, 40 years.
Right.
So it was not unforeseeable that this might happen.
Exactly. Yeah. You didn't have to completely guess. Okay. So the article mentions China and Russia have been working in an increasingly coordinated manner in the past few years in multiple spaces, all towards the central aim of weakening the dominant global power position of the U.S. And then this author says, and then supplanting it in this. Now, this is the guy that's like selling his book, right? I don't know. Maybe that's the other guy. Anyway. Let's see what else to call out about this. Right. So this is the deal that Black Horse mentioned. Moscow state-owned oil giant Rosneft signed an $80 billion 10-year deal to supply the China National Petroleum Corporation with 100 million metric tons of oil over that period, shipped from Kazakhstan to refining plants in northwest China. All right. All of this is going to continue regardless of the U.S.-led sanctions, I gather. Right? So that's smart for them. And it says that this increase in oil delivery to China is part of a broad-based strategy to circumvent, to as great a degree as possible, the effects of sanctions against Russia that had been in development since the takeover of Crimea. Yeah, that's the thing I wanted to mention. Yeah, so they're looking at what's happening with Crimea. As Black Horse mentioned, they know how these things go down from watching what's been done to Iran, etc. And so they go ahead and prepare for it, right? By pushing for certain business deals.
Well, this deal is only possible because pipeline infrastructure exists to deliver the oil between the 2 points. Right. So sometime in that 14-year, or in that the years between 2014 and now, they built the infrastructure necessary to deliver oil along this vector.
Yeah. So, there it is. One element of this has been Rosneft's swift development of the Northern Sea route, which allows for relatively unimpeded delivery of crude oil to China. So they've set up pipelines, whatever's involved there, so that they can get oil to China in a pretty efficient manner, and not cross over any U.S.-aligned territories, I assume.
And probably not cross international waters either, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And then looking forward just slightly, it says that Rosneft's Arctic developments would eventually produce 100 million tons of oil per year, 30 million tons of oil being sent from the Arctic along that Northern Sea route between now and 2024 alone. So yeah, this is paying off for them with immediate effect. Then finally, I highlighted from the article, this multi-level cooperation strategy between Russia and China provides financing into Russia from China, regardless of possible sanctions from the U.S. and its allies, including the much vaunted barring from the SWIFT international payment system. So I think some people, we're a little vague, most of us civilians, right, Black Horse, on maybe not you, but most of us normal people don't really understand what SWIFT is. But it sounded like, they cut Russia off from SWIFT. Well, that'll be the end of Russia. Well, I think part of the point of this is, well, maybe not.
Yeah, it turns out no.
Yeah, yeah. It turns out they can keep doing business with China just fine, and China's not gonna participate.
It even turns out that before SWIFT existed, people managed to pay each other.
Yeah, right. Amazing that. Right. Okay, so anything else to highlight from this article?
No.
All right, then let's see. Switch to this one, which is a mess. I'm sorry. I turned it into a PDF so I could highlight, and I don't even have a title anymore. What was the title of this one?
Title is
It's covered by a
all
ad.
Russia's big exports could soon be in rubles, Kremlin signals.
Right. Okay. So they want to keep selling their product, and Russia wants to keep selling its oil and so forth, and it wants to not have the ruble become worthless.
Yeah,
Right.
so recall our principles earlier on. One of the things that creates demand for a currency is the requirement to have that currency in order to buy exports. So whether that's creating demand for Canadian dollars by the need to sort of buy products in Canadian dollars, or whether that's the need to buy wheat, natural gas, oil, except the various minerals that Russia exports, fertilizer, etc. If those products, if you can pay for those products in foreign currency that never actually enters Russia, then you can use your sanctions regime to prevent those dollars from propping up the ruble. Russia is very aggressively fighting to have its exported products paid for with rubles, which forces
Right.
those who want to purchase them to purchase rubles.
Right. And support or stabilize rubles. So few notes, things to note in this article. Germany imported 55% of its gas from Russia last year. That'd be referring to natural gas, I'm guessing.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So that's quite a. I mean, I've heard crazy talk that Germany's like, well, we just won't use Russian gas and we'll just not use energy anymore, but I don't. That doesn't sound very realistic to me, frankly. I mean,
yeah,
imagine,
a lot of lights are going to go out if that happens.
Yeah, imagine the United States cutting half of its, energy supply or whatever. Well, it's not its full. Gas would not be the only thing that Germany uses, right? But yeah, it'd be a big hit. Right. So Russia's top lawmakers suggested on Wednesday, that's probably last week's Wednesday, almost Russia's entire energy and commodity exports could soon be priced in rubles. He said that the US dollar's role as a global reserve currency had already taken a hit.
Yeah,
And that
I
a
see a
move to
question.
pricing.
I see a
Okay,
question
go
in
ahead.
chat here that I wanted to
Yeah,
address. The
please.
comment is, why weren't they selling in rubles before? And the answer to
Yeah.
this has to do
And
with
I wanted to mention there's proportions. Is it in this article? Here we go. Russia exports several $100 billion worth of natural gas to Europe each year. Euros account for 58% of Gazprom exports, US dollars 39%, and sterling around 3%. So just to give you what the situation was prior to this push to ruble. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that so the question then comes, what did Russia do with all of these foreign currency reserves that it was accumulating through exports previously? And the answer to that was that they stored them in, some of them they stored at the Federal Reserve, and some of them they converted to rubles. But the very large accumulation of foreign currency that Russia had prior to the conflict was immediately seized as a consequence of the sanctions. And so that loss of confidence by Russia in foreign currency reserves held abroad is one of the reasons for this change.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Basically, all those euros don't do us much good if we don't have them in our hand, evidently. So
that's right. And if we're prevented from spending them in any of the countries we might want to spend them in, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So what's the point in continuing to use euros and dollars if you guys are going to be like that, basically, right? Okay. So let's see. If you want gas, find rubles, he said. And we might widen the list of export products priced in rubles to include fertilizer, grain, food oil, coal, metals, timber, etc. Because it's a big exporter of all those items, I believe. What else did we want to highlight? Yeah, Russia is trying to both bolster the ruble and in the longer run chip away at the dominance of the dollar in pricing global energy and commodities. Yeah, this is maybe too big of a question for you, but briefly, it certainly seems important to the U.S. government to keep people using the U.S. dollar, right? Why? In short,
so this is a very complicated question about which there are a number of theories, but the most the most obvious answer to it is right now there are trillions of dollars of reserves of U.S. dollars all around the world. Governments specifically hold something like $20 trillion of reserves of US dollars. That's just cash sitting around stabilizing local currencies. China's the largest holder of them, but there are many others. So when the United States inflates the dollar by 10%, there's an effective tax on all of these reserves applied. Right. So 10% of $20 trillion is a really big number. If people stop using the dollar as much, then that number will shrink and the ability to tax foreign countries via inflation will decline.
Got it. Okay. Right. So, yeah. And you can imagine why Russia and probably many other countries don't maybe love this deal, right? Where the U.S. government just gets to grab from them in this way.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is the fact that all these countries are using U.S. dollar reserves means that the U.S. has sanctions as a very effective lever, whereas if they didn't, then sanctions would be much more difficult to do what they did to Venezuela or Iran or Cuba to whoever it is they want to do it to next.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to speed through a little bit more from this article real quick. This caught my attention because I was just hearing a smart person saying that pay attention to Sergei Lavrov. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that Russia's relations with China are at their strongest level ever. And then they talk about sanctions boomeranging. Russia says the sanctions, and in particular the freezing of about $300 billion in Russia's central bank reserves, amount to a declaration of economic war. Former President Medvedev said the sanctions had boomeranged back to undermine European and North America economies, driving up prices for fuel and heating, in our economies over here, and eroding confidence in the dollar and the euro. The world is waking up. Confidence in reserve currencies is melting like a morning fog, Medvedev said. Abandoning the dollar and the euro as the world's main reserves no longer looks like a fantasy. And then he says the era of regional currencies is coming. Right. So what he's saying is there's been a U.S. dollar dominance with, some room for euros and so forth. But it's really been the world of the U.S. dollar. And he's suggesting that we might be heading to a situation where it depends where you are. The U.S. dollar remains dominant in the West, but the yuan and the ruble start to play more importance in the East, for example, right? We will see. That's a prediction. We really don't know what will happen there, but worth paying attention to that because that would be a huge shift.
Usually when a political figure makes a prediction, what they're doing is they're expressing their view as to what should happen.
Yeah, right.
So when Medvedev is predicting the abandonment of the US dollar, he's announcing that this is the sort of political strategy or geopolitical strategy of Russia.
Okay, now our next headline is going to get people a little more excited than they should be probably, but let's just walk through it carefully. Russia's three-step program to put the ruble on a gold standard. Now, I saw at least one person say, Radlib, is it true that they're on a gold standard now? People have gotten rumors and gotten a little overheated on this. I want to talk people down a little bit because that's not real. The ruble is not on a gold standard. Having said that, there's a reason that we featured gold prominently in the thumbnail because there is something interesting going on, I think. Right, Black Horse?
Yeah, and there's secret point number 4 to this that we have in another article, but
we can
talk about it.
Okay, so let's cover the 3 points that this author, and I'm sorry, I'm not even saying the names of anyone. I can't even find the name. Someone at Forex Canada. I see no author name. Okay, anyway. He says he thinks the Bank of Russia is quickly moving to a gold standard. Here's how he thinks they're going to do it. First, buy the domestic Russian gold supply.
So this is the move. This is one of the two moves that got a lot of people in the West talking about a Russian gold standard. So the Russian government announced a hard bid for gold in the country in rubles. So you
and according to this, it says, I don't know the value of rubles, but instead it would start buying gold from Russian banks at 5,000 rubles per gram. It says at current exchange rates, that's a steep discount, at least at first glance. So the point is, that means that selling gold to the Bank of Russia in rubles looks like a really good deal right now, right?
So it's a steep discount. So they're actually, the bid is under the market right now.
So it's under the market.
At first glance, it looks like that's a bad deal for the sellers.
I get it. Sorry. Okay.
So the question it seeks to answer later in the article is why are the Russian banks consenting to do this? Well, part of it is because rubles are, the view of everybody in Russia is that the temporary shock to rubles was, a market displacement that was unlikely to be permanent. But there's a more in-depth story here, right? One of the parts of this is that gold locally in Russia is much cheaper than gold on the international market. So even though that looks like a discount based on the price of gold, remember we talked about in our markets update, every commodity has a quantity, a quality, and a delivery space. Well, it's a lot cheaper to deliver gold in Russia than it is to deliver gold in New York right now. So even though the price being offered by the Russian bank is maybe 80% of the price on the global market, they don't make you deliver the gold on the global market. You have to deliver it somewhere in Russia, right?
Right. So just quoting from the article, then Russian gold is much cheaper than non-Russian gold now because Russian gold is cut off from the rest of the gold market, and there's risk of retaliation if you get caught buying it from Russia.
Yeah. So if you buy gold from Russia and you're in a U.S. aligned sanctioned country, then the full force of the U.S. law enforcement apparatus will, apply its. I don't know all of the relevant laws there, but I'm sure they've got lots of legal tools at their disposal.
Okay, so then here he brings his argument home. So if you're a Russian bank, not the Bank of Russia, but a different bank, and you have some gold, and you can't sell it to someone out of the country except at a steep discount, and the Bank of Russia is offering to buy it from you at less of a discount, that's still a premium for you, and the Bank of Russia splits the difference, increases its gold reserves, and in that way it stabilizes the ruble. So his argument here, step one of this argument, it seems to me, Black Horse, is not rubles on a gold standard, but gold is being used as one of, a couple of things we've already talked about, as one tool among several to help stabilize the ruble.
That's correct.
Right? Because as the Bank of Russia builds up its gold supply, that I assume has built some confidence that the ruble is backed by some gold, right?
That's right. And we'll see in the other article that we cover that Russia is actively encouraging its citizens and corporations to use gold as a form of savings in order to deal with the vacillations in the market, in the FX markets right now.
Right. Okay, so that's step one of his argument. Step two, strengthen the ruble and drain gold from the West. So he says they want to strengthen the ruble internationally. And this is the part of what we've already talked about. They'll only sell energy for rubles to unfriendly countries, the countries sanctioning Russia. So that would pick up the demand for the ruble if that works out. And it says that could eventually turn their 5,000 ruble discount internationally into a premium encouraging more gold flows into Russia internationally as well. Okay, I see. So if the ruble gets stronger and they stick to that, we will buy gold for 5,000 rubles, right, per gram. Then if the ruble gets stronger, it becomes more and more attractive to sell gold to the Bank of Russia, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that drains gold out of the West and into Russia. Okay,
that's the plan, anyway.
That's the plan. Let's see. Oh, now this was an interesting comment. I just had to throw this in because it's always fun to slam on the Keynesians. He writes, the mainstream financial press is so focused on the Russia selling gold angle because they're deeply Keynesian. They're so deeply Keynesian, they do not understand that gold is money rather than the paper that they print, and that the paper only has value because it is still exchangeable for gold. So he thinks people are missing what Russia's up to because they don't understand that. By the way, as an Austrian, I have to say, we love gold. We wish it were money, but it's not. So I wouldn't go with him when he says that gold is money. But I agree with his underlying sentiment here, which is that people might make a mistake and think that it's no big deal that Russia's building up gold supplies, because who cares about gold? Well, it's still a factor, right?
Yeah, it's something.
Yeah. It's for one thing, as we explained with Christopher Hansen's help, it is a quasi money. It's a great thing to have around in the case of volatility.
Well, and one of the great things about gold as a currency in a world of sanctions is that gold is virtually untraceable. So it's very difficult to enforce sanctions in the long term on Russian or any other country's gold. Right.
Okay. This is the final step of his argument, which here I think the wishful thinking is at its strongest, but let's see what he has to say. He says, finally, turn the ruble into a gold substitute. Now, how would they do that?
So the assumption here is that if they're going to accumulate all this reserve of gold, eventually they'll use that gold as a way of putting a bid under the ruble, the way that they've put a bid under gold in Russia with the ruble. So
a bid. Okay, I don't know.
So putting a bid under gold, that would be making the ruble exchangeable to gold at some ratio. So that would be a return to classic hard money.
That's a gold standard, yeah. So he says it can simply declare the ruble a hard gold substitute at a fixed exchange rate.
But
in other words,
when people are reading these headlines, the keyword "it can," it has not. There is currently no.
Yeah. What the author is pointing to, though, and the reason why we included this here, right, is that Russia does seem to be making, in my view, just speaking neutrally as an economist, some astute moves in the midst of all this, and that is why they were able to, in several weeks, bring the ruble back.
And
when no one expected that.
It also speaks to the ongoing psychological importance of gold when assessing the quality of money. That the large store of gold held by the Russian state bank appears to have some real significance in creating confidence in their currency.
Oh, and then this is really interesting. Again, the sanctions is having a boomerang effect. Yeah. He writes, Western financial thought has this idea that if they cheapen Russian gold by sanctioning it, they're hurting Russia by lessening the amount of stuff they could potentially buy with that gold. In fact, they're actually helping Russia by encouraging gold inflows into the country, making it much cheaper for the Bank of Russia to amass much more gold to back the ruble at a credible rate when the time comes. So again, he's positing some 4D chess a little bit here, but it's not insane what he's suggesting.
Well, and certainly it is the case that they've made it easier for the Russian central bank to accumulate gold.
Yeah, they have made it easier for them to accumulate gold, and that helps stabilize the ruble, even if they don't have some ultimate master plan of going back to the gold standard. But for obvious reasons, some of us find that exciting that anyone would go back to the gold standard for any reason. Okay, so let's go back to, or let's go to our final article here, and I think we'll stop with this one because we're almost at an hour and a half, Black Horse. Russia drops gold tax to encourage savers to dump dollars. Okay, so what happened here is that they had a VAT on the purchase of gold. And this might be surprising to some people. In some places, you know, gold, you buy it for the price of the gold. You don't have a tax on top of it. So it's a little closer to acting like something exchangeable with money. You know, you're not paying a price just to have gold. You can just switch between money and gold a little more smoothly. But they had a VAT. I think it was, I don't know that they mentioned the amount, but it wasn't trivial, I think. And he, on Wednesday, Putin signed a law that exempts individuals from VAT on the purchase of gold. Now, why would he do that?
So there's two stories here. First, there's the action. Second, there's the statement made by Putin to accompany it. He exempting individuals from VAT in buying gold puts them in a position where purchasing gold and then selling gold, it reduces the transactional cost there, so it makes it a more effective vehicle for saving. The second is that concomitant with revoking the VAT, he specifically announced that he did this with the intent of providing a stable vehicle for savings for his citizens. That's closer. The politically announcing the intent for your citizens to use gold as currency is the closest thing we've seen to a gold standard since the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
wait. I'm sorry. Wait, now that's not in this article. Do you know what he actually said?
Signed into law. So if you go to your highlighted section,
signed into a law that exempts individuals from VAT on the purchase of gold.
So when it says the measure is
to provide support to Russian citizens looking to invest their rubles, which have been depreciating in value.
Yeah. I should have included the excerpt from the press release, but anyways, the press release from the Russian bank at the time indicated that this was intended to provide a stable vehicle for savings for Russians.
Okay, got it.
And it's worth noting that this article and this action is a little bit older, so this occurred. Can you get me a date on that?
Yeah, let's see. This is March 9th.
Yes, so this is in the downward spiral. This is in the downward spiral part of the Ruble story.
Right. Yeah, before it really started shooting back up. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. There is one more paragraph I highlighted to read. Moscow has imposed restrictions on the purchase of some foreign currencies, including the dollar and the euro, the common way for Russians to protect their savings in the past. So basically, he's saying, I don't want you to use the dollar and the euro because, you know, we're kind of at a financial war with them, right? But I am going to make it easier for you to use gold. And I did find it. It's at the end of the article. It says previously, when buying physical gold, Russians had to pay 20% of the purchase in VAT. So that just absolutely kills it, in my view. A 20% VAT on value-added tax on gold means that you just are not going to use gold for savings. And it's not going to be like a money or even hardly a quasi-money with that kind of penalty on it. Right.
Yeah, it would make it very foolish to use it as money.
Exactly. So he's saying, okay, I don't want you to. There's restrictions on dollars and euros, which is how you've protected your savings in the past, but that's okay because I'm going to take the penalty off gold, and you're going to be able to park your money in gold, and so that means more gold, not maybe in the Bank of Russia specifically, but more gold in Russia, right?
Yeah, and if you think back to the discussion we had at the beginning of this, the way in which sanctions tend to destabilize currencies, one of the mechanisms through which that tends to happen is the citizens, both sort of at a low level and at an elite level, spending their local currency to buy foreign currency as a vehicle to protect their savings. And what Putin is doing here is providing an alternative mechanism that doesn't damage the ruble. So if his citizens go and take their rubles and buy US dollars or buy euros or buy British pounds or something, that's going to damage the ruble from an FX point of view. Whereas if his citizens go and buy gold, probably from the Russian central bank, that's not going to have the same effect on the ruble, because you're not going to be creating selling pressure on the ruble.
Okay, so we have. There was one more thing you wanted to talk about, which is the. We don't have an article for it or anything, but what was that final point you wanted to make?
Oh yeah, so we were talking about the effect of the effect of the SWIFT cutoff and the effect of the seizures of the assets of individual Russian citizens on the FX market. So if we look at what makes the Russian sanctions unique compared to historical sanctions, there are really two elements of it. One is that they targeted not just the Russian state, but a pretty significant number of individual actors in Russia who the US, in its infinite wisdom, has decided are the oligarchs behind the Russian regime. Who knows? Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I don't know. But by targeting, and when I say targeting them, what they've done is they've frozen their assets held abroad. So, very famously, they seized the world's most expensive yacht in the Black Sea and a bunch of other stuff, along with making it much more difficult by cutting off SWIFT for Russian banks to engage in foreign currency transactions outside of Russia. One of the really interesting effects of this in the FX market is that whatever you've done to the confidence of non-Russians in the US dollar, you've certainly shaken the confidence of Russians in the US dollar, because whether my US dollars are safe or not, it's very clear that if you're like a minor league millionaire in Russia, it's a very bad idea to have your money in US dollars in a US bank, because the US government could decide you're part of the Russian regime and it's not your money anymore. So when we talked about those mechanisms for collapsing a currency, one of them is that the local elite starts selling all their local currency and buying international currency. Well, they've really cut off that mechanism by the way they implemented these sanctions.
So to be specific, this would mean the local elite getting out of rubles, which would contribute to the ruble losing value or inflating, I guess is how it's.
That's right. If this was a Venezuela situation, a lot of the local elite would have sold their local Venezuelan currency and bought US dollars. But if you've strongly signaled to the local elite that their US dollars held internationally are not safe, you've eliminated that dynamic as which would ordinarily put a lot of downward pressure on the local currency.
Right. So just one more factor to highlight, along with the gold play, the people have to buy oil and gas from us in rubles play, right? Am I missing the sanctions? That now this is not a play of Russia's, right? Though maybe they could have been, the government could have anticipated, just like you said, they saw what happens with sanctions, so they might have anticipated that this would have happened. But it helps them. All these things help them stabilize the ruble and explain why the ruble is back in action after President Biden just less than a week ago said it was crushed.
Well, and as we wrap up this stream, it's worth saying that this stream is not a prediction of what will happen in the future. It's an explanation of why the ruble has not yet collapsed. And we'll see what happens over the next months and years.
And the future is unpredictable, especially when a war is going on, which introduces even more unpredictability.
Certainly in the short term, the strategy of targeting individual Russian citizens has not helped them do damage to the Russian currency. So.
Right.
And it has not yet resulted in the regime change they seem to hope for. So, there's that too.
Yes, right. Yeah, because in theory, I mean, it's, I guess they haven't officially said it, except for the President Biden making a gaffe, right? But in theory, they might actually be trying to encourage Russians to overthrow Putin, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty explicitly the theory of the sanctions that,
Right.
So
Make people unhappy, and then they'll overthrow, and they'll come to Papa US, right? Okay, we have one very generous super chat. He says, Mr. Monty Fontaine, thank you, sir. Says, great chat, chaps. Do you think Russia will actually start accepting Bitcoin for gas? What ramifications does this have for both Bitcoin and the ruble? Okay, before we address this specifically, I haven't heard anything about Russia wanting to accept Bitcoin.
There was
there was? You did?
Yeah, so there was a statement from one of the officials in the Russian government suggesting that they might do this.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm behind.
So key in that statement is might, and
yeah.
I have no idea how serious that might is, so I can't.
Okay, yeah, but I just want to point out that this isn't as crazy as it sounds. We've already just seen some moves to strengthen their gold position in Russia. It's not entirely nuts. I wouldn't bet anything on it, but it's not entirely nuts that they'd be making a move towards a gold standard. That would certainly stabilize the ruble, I think, which is clearly a goal, a policy goal of the Russian government. So that would be one way to do it if they're bold. But we've also heard about, and I've forgotten the country already, but some like Central American country, El Salvador started accepting Bitcoin or something. So, I don't point to any of this to say, a year from now, everyone's just going to be able to use Bitcoin as money or gold as money, or something like that. What is interesting to me is that all of these are cracks in the US dollar as reserve currency that just has been the position for many, many, many decades. No one questioned it. Well, maybe people question it, but no one seemed to be able to make a budge of any sort against it, make any moves against it. And now, in just really quite recent years, I think, we're seeing some serious moves that make me think that there are people, and in one of the articles we saw, sort of an announced policy goal, we would like to have the US dollar not be the reserve currency, right? I mean, Russia's saying this outright.
Yeah.
So I think we're headed towards, we're seeing more and more signs of unrest among the natives, shall we say, about the US dollar as reserve currency.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
There's dissatisfaction among an increasing number of people about that state of affairs. Whether they will get their way or not, we'll see. But right. There's certainly dissatisfaction. The other part of the question is kind of interesting.
Some of these people are little countries like India, Russia, China, right? I mean, if India, Russia, and China get together and decide, we're going to use Bitcoin, or we're going to go on the gold standard, or, some really drastic move towards sound money. I would say that could be a real game changer.
Well, and it's also much more credible than, say, Saddam Hussein in the 90s saying that he wanted to end the US dollar as a reserve currency.
Right. So he just wasn't a big enough player to pull something like that off. But Russia, China, India get together. Well, now you're talking, right?
Yeah, it's certainly a very different question. But there's the other half of his question that I want to address, which is what would it do to Bitcoin if you could exchange it for Russian oil? And I think this is a question that really gets into the theory of currencies and into supply and demand. So first of all, I think that it would lend a lot more liquidity to Bitcoin because it would create a natural sink in the case of a mimetic crash of Bitcoin, right? So the problem with Bitcoin right now is that in an instance when there's a mimetic selling event, that means lots of people are selling at the same time and seeing the price go down and selling because they're seeing the price go down. The question is, what do you do with your Bitcoin? And the answer to this point has been you hold on to it and hope that it goes up in the future. But in the future, the answer might be instead of selling it in the market, you decide that you want to sell it for some commodity. And even if you're just in a position where Bitcoin is passing through transactionally more hands, you're in a position where there are more buy and sell transactions of Bitcoin going on every day, which means that the mimetic selling event doesn't cause as much price dislocation as it otherwise would. So
Right.
the example in sort of market terms is in if there's sort of bad news out on a company's stock, and that company is, GameStop or something that, they've got average daily volume traded that is relatively small, you can have really wild price disruptions. Whereas if there's, a similar negative sentiment kind of event on Google stock, which trades a lot, typically the price disruption is going to be much smaller.
Right. So back to stabilization. I think what you're describing is a process where Bitcoin would get a little more stable, which, as far as I can tell, I mean, maybe I put too much weight on anecdote here, but I see people who are like, well, Bitcoin's interesting. Yes, I see that the long-term trend is good, but man, in the short term, the roller coaster ride can make you sick,
Yeah, if you look at a chart, there's some pretty wild price fluctuations at the moment. And for currencies, just from a confidence point of view, wild price fluctuations are really bad, because people want to believe that. I mean, the whole point of a store in value is that you want to believe that it'll be worth similar tomorrow that it's worth today.
Right.
And so increasing increasing the number of transactions occurring in liquidity or occurring in Bitcoin is really the sort of it's the promised land for creating for Bitcoin as a currency.
Right. Yeah. So that I see. So that's why you really noticed when you talked about, what's the effect if you can buy Russian gas in Bitcoin? The effect is there's a lot more being done with Bitcoin, and it starts to change its nature.
That's right. It starts to become a currency much more than a mimetic asset.
Right. So the point is that enough increased liquidity, that is the money or whatever you want to call Bitcoin being used regularly in large purchases on a steady basis, that increase in liquidity, you get enough of that, and now you're talking about a different kind of, a quantitative change becomes a qualitative change in how people view Bitcoin in that case.
That's right? Correct. Yeah.
Okay, very good. I think we'll wrap it up there. We went a little over what we were planning, but thanks to Black Horse for bringing the financial markets knowledge. I feel like I know economics, but don't know financial markets that well, which that may sound strange, but if you know more about economics and more about financial markets, you might understand how that could be.
The two cross over less than you might hope.
Yeah, right. It's kind of strange because people will kind of, I'll say that, I'm a published economist and stuff, and people will be like, oh, should I buy Bitcoin or whatever? And I'm like, whoa, just because I worked on the, certain points of economic theory doesn't mean you should look to me for investment advice, right?
Yeah, well, just because I know investment products inside out doesn't mean I can tell you whether they're going up or down either. So that.
Right. Much easier to explain to everybody what happened after it happened, right? Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. I think we hit the last of the.
Oh, there's one more I see in here asking about gold mining. That's a question I don't know the answer to. Unfortunately, Sam153.
Is this a super chat?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Oh, okay. Sam153. All right. So what about gold mining? Sam153, thank you for the super chat. What about gold mining? Is Russia confident that it can also outproduce the West in the long term? Yeah. Here's my instinctive reaction. Tell me what you think, Black Horse. And that is that we'd have to talk about the really long term, because in the short term, I think the gold that's already out of the ground, that is what Russia's focused on, is pulling that into Russia, right?
That's certainly the focus of their strategy.
Right. And but my point is that I think that is a much bigger factor for quite a while than what they can mine.
Yeah, so gold mining is usually a pretty small fraction of total gold supply, even in periods of time when gold prices are very high.
Right.
So unless there's a very significant change in that dynamic, I don't expect gold mining to be a big part of this play. In fact, if gold mining becomes more effective because of a rise in the price of gold, it actually undermines gold's quality as a currency.
Yeah, I think I thought I saw this once. How much gold is mined each year? I thought it was like max they increase the amount of gold in the world by 1%,
Yeah,
and that even
that's
sounds high to me.
uh,
That's some pretty awesome gold mining, actually. If you're adding 1%
typically
of supply.
typically in like extreme in spikes in price of gold where extraction is very actively uh, very actively pursued, you're looking at like 1%, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Right. So yeah, um, I'm not. If Russia is going to be on the gold standard, then maybe having a gold mining become well. It just doesn't matter though, because remember, sorry, quick economic theory thing. Rothbard argues, and the Austrians in general, I think, argue that once you have a certain amount of a money, then that's enough, and it doesn't actually benefit you qua money
No,
to
it's
like
actually
have more gold.
negative, right? You can look at this in the Spanish experience in like
Right.
the uh,
Where they're
period
bringing in
after.
money, precious metals from the New World. Yeah.
That's right, and all they do is import inflation by diluting the money supply.
Right. Right. So, unfortunately, it's sort of Keynesian type of thinking. Well, not even Keynesian. Go back to the what do you call them? The mercantilists, right? They had this idea that the country that gathers the most gold is doing the best, right? But that isn't quite right. Though in Russia's case, I totally understand why they're trying to gather some gold in to the borders. So, okay, I think we are about there then. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that was interesting. We'll see where the story goes. I'm not in a big rush, Black Horse. I think let's see how things settle out and maybe revisit this together in a couple months or something, and revisit this Ruble story and see how Russia's strategy worked out.
Yeah, there will
Certainly,
be
it's
a
been
logical time,
dramatic.
I think.
Yeah, it's been dramatic in the last 30 days, the down and then the back up. Probably, real life means it'll probably jump around a bit over the next couple months. But in a few months, maybe we can start to step back and see has their strategy worked. Oh, one more. Okay, Matty G, and then we're going to stop. We've got gold stable coins. Wish we had silver, etc. Do you know what a stable coin is?
Yeah, stable coin is a coin that's pegged to a commodity. So it's a cryptocurrency that you can exchange for, in this case, gold. Um, this is an idea that's been promoted in the crypto markets.
Okay.
You know, uh, in a world where gold standards come back in currency, stable coins have an interesting future.
Mm-hmm.
In a world where gold is used the way it's used now is kind of disaster insurance. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that the gold is stored centrally seems like a weakness in stablecoin, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert in crypto markets, so I don't want to
Right.
go too far here.
Right. So effectively, they do a sort of a kind of like a crypto backed by gold, but it's not an actual gold coin, so you're not holding it.
That's right.
So
And the
yeah,
advantage of that is it's easy to transact. So
right.
a number of the gold enthusiasts that have been around for the past, I mean, Eric Sprott was talking about this idea like many years ago, maybe 20, 25 years ago, about using like gold debit cards, etc. Um, but that's a fundamentally different activity than the activity that your typical gold holder is engaged in, where they're holding gold as insurance against, a very nasty event.
Right. Okay. I think we are truly done now. Okay, thanks everybody. Talk to you later.